I was 19 years old when my father died, and my grandfather took our home and left us on the streets. I will never forget that small house in the back streets of Brooklyn, because it wasn't just where we lived, it was where my father took his last breath. When my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2012, we spent everything we had on his treatment. In the end, we mortgaged that house. But my grandfather, Harold, came over that day, had a cup of coffee with us, and then said, "I'll pay off the debt," taking the deed in his name. At that moment, I didn't understand. But that was the first step in a theft. My father passed away in March 2013, just 3 days after his funeral. There was a knock at the door. The police were standing outside. My mother looked frozen. My grandfather pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. "The house is mine now. The debt wasn't paid. No condolences, no shred of conscience. They forced us out of our home." My mother was crying, and for the first time, I felt a fire burning inside me. That night, we stayed in a motel, only 2 bags in our suitcase, and an eruption ready to explode within me. If I had stayed silent, I would have been just another victim. But subscribe, because I came back with proof. And this story is just beginning. The next morning, my father's former lawyer, David Bennett, called me. His voice was calm, but his words shattered me. "Your father left me an envelope in 2011, and it was meant to be delivered only to you." Inside was a promissory note, signed in my grandfather's own handwriting. On November 10th, 2012, I borrowed $250,000 from Robert Larson. That note could change the game. But when I went to my grandfather, he slammed the door in my face. "It's fake! You made it up!" he shouted. But I wasn't going to let this go. Harold Larson hadn't just stolen our home. He had stolen my father's honor. But now, I had a trail. That's why I hired Maria Rodriguez, a retired NYPD detective. She looked like a battle-worn soldier, but her gaze was sharp. "If this man is lying, there will be a trace," she said. Maria combed through my grandfather's bank accounts. It took her a week to find the first clue. On November 12th, 2012, my grandfather had indeed deposited $250,000 into his account. But he hadn't used that money to pay off the debt. For the first time, I had concrete proof that I was right. But this was only the beginning. Maria said, "Finding the money isn't enough. If the deed transfer was fraudulent, we need to see it in official records." That night, in the motel, my mother and I sat in silence in front of the TV. My father's chair was empty. I could still hear his voice. "Everything will be okay, son." But nothing was okay. My grandfather had not only left us homeless, but he had managed to keep his reputation spotless. People still thought he was a respectable businessman. But I knew the truth. And the truth was with me. The next morning, we went to the Manhattan Deeds office. The clerk checked the files. "The deed transfer was made on January 15th, 2013, he said. My father was in his final weeks at that time. He could barely speak. Rodriguez lowered her glasses and asked the clerk, "Is there a doctor's report?" There wasn't. According to New York law, if a terminal patient's consciousness isn't intact, their signatures are deemed invalid. And my father had been under high-dose morphine treatment during that period. If we could prove that, my grandfather's entire scheme would collapse. But before filing a lawsuit, we needed one more thing: my father's hospital records. So I went to Columbia Presbyterian. The clerk said, "Only the legal representative can obtain the records." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm his son," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then leaned in and whispered, "One of the doctors from that time is still here. Maybe they can help you." My father never left anyone in debt in his lifetime, but his own father used his death to increase his wealth. The doctor's notes stated, "The patient is under the effects of high-dose morphine. Decision-making ability is limited." The moment I held that document in my hands, my eyes welled up. We finally had concrete evidence to present in court. My father's mental state proved the invalidity of the deed transfer, but Maria had found something else. "I took another look at the bank transactions," she said. "Your grandfather received $250,000 on November 12, 2012, but the next day, he transferred $200,000 to the Cayman Islands. Not only had he failed to pay the debt, he had also laundered the money abroad." While Maria traced the money, I completed the lawsuit filing with attorney David Bennett. We sued my grandfather, Harold, for fraudulent deed transfer, financial misconduct, and emotional damages. The day the lawsuit was filed, my grandfather sent me a message. "Do you realize what you've done? Don't turn the family against you." But we weren't family anymore. That bond had broken the day he left us out in the streets. Emotional low point. My mother still struggled to accept it. "He's your grandfather," she said. "That man is not my father," I replied. For the first time, my mother chose silence. If this story feels familiar, if you've lived through something similar, share it in the comments. Subscribe, because that's the biggest support you can give me. The lawsuit process was slow, but every document Maria uncovered strengthened our case, especially the one proving my father had been admitted to intensive care the day before the deed transfer. Attorney David said, "This is our silver bullet." At the time of the transfer, my father was not mentally sound. This could end the game. But my grandfather wasn't sitting idle. His lawyer, Gregory Miller, gave statements to the press claiming, "James is slandering his family." Local newspapers ran headlines, "The Larson family feud." But we remained silent. Because what we had didn't need the press, it needed the courtroom. When the trial day arrived, the courtroom was packed. My grandfather walked in wearing a gray suit, removed his glasses, and looked me up and down. He didn't speak a word, but there was still arrogance in his gaze, as if he still believed he could slip away. We presented the details of his Cayman account transfer to the court. When the judge examined the files, her expression changed. Judge Rebecca Shaw compared the signatures, hospital reports, and bank records. Maria took the stand and gave her testimony. Harold Larson took the money, but he didn't pay the debt. He also took the deed from his son, who was not mentally capable of signing anything. This is not just unethical, it's illegal. When my grandfather's lawyer argued, but Robert signed it willingly, the judge held up the report. He was on high-dose morphine at the time of signing. Under New York real property law, Fee 462, this signature is invalid. The silence in the courtroom was more powerful than the verdict itself. The judge read the ruling in a firm voice. The deed transfer is invalid. The property is returned to James Larson. Harold Larson will pay $150,000 in damages. My grandfather leapt to his feet. "This kid ruined me." I simply nodded and said, "This was my father's right." After the ruling, I went to my father's grave. The deed was in my hands. I ran my fingers across the headstone. "We did it, Dad." The house was ours again, but deep down I still felt empty. That house was now just a memory. That's why I decided to sell it. But I was going to do something else with the money. A few weeks later, I sold the house. Exactly $970,000 was deposited into my account. My grandfather's only goal was that house. But now it was no longer his, and it never would be. When my mother asked, "What do we do now?" I gave her the answer that came from within. We will build a true legacy with this money. I founded a small but impactful organization in Boston, the Robert Larson Foundation for Cancer Patients. Our first patient was a 42-year-old truck driver. He had no insurance. We covered his treatment. Then came a young girl, then a teacher. Soon, a list started to form. Within 3 years, we had funded treatment for 47 patients. The foundation, bearing my father's name, was changing lives every day. Meanwhile, My grandfather had disappeared into silence. After the court ruling, he was forced to sell his mansion in Long Island. The local news reports shrank his social circle. He lost his reputation and his comfort. One day, his secretary reached out to me. "Mr. Harold left you an envelope," she said. Inside, there was only a blank sheet of paper and a photograph of my father in his youth. I suppose this was the silent form of regret. If you've experienced a similar injustice, share your story in the comments. Subscribe, because together we can uncover more. Then I received news. My grandfather had died. I was invited to his funeral, but I didn't go. My mother just looked at me. She didn't ask. We all knew the answer. That day, I made a decision. I went to MIT in Boston and met with Professor John Frey. "I want to create a scholarship fund for cancer research," I told him. This was the last large sum left in my pocket, $250,000. The exact amount my grandfather had taken from my father. Every dollar stolen from my father would now be used for good. At first, Frey was surprised. Then his eyes welled up. "This fund could save lives," he said. I nodded and added, "and silence others." At night, I still sometimes see my father in my dreams. That moment, toward the end, when he looked at me in silence. I hadn't been able to say anything then, but now, everything speaks for him. A month later, we received a letter at the foundation. A young woman from Kansas wrote, "With your support, I got the treatment I needed. Now I'm sharing my own story." We framed that letter and hung it at the entrance of the foundation. With my grandfather's money, we saved 47 lives. All he got was a house. We gave life. Even today, when people hear this story, they ask me one thing. After all these years, do you still feel anger? No. My anger has become a system. As long as the foundation exists, my father's name will live on, and my grandfather will be forgotten. The next target? Anyone who thinks justice belongs to them alone.